Now to a shocking story. Federal investigators say this man right here, who they say took part in the Hamas-led terrorist attack on Israel, has been hiding out in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Get low. Come on. Hook up. Police! A little farther, bro. A little more. Okay, good. You're good. We're good. Go. Police!
Alert the FBI arresting an alleged October 7th attacker living in Louisiana. Federal prosecutors.
Before dawn broke over Louisiana, a convoy of unmarked federal vehicles rolled silently through a quiet suburban street, their headlights dimmed and engines cutting off in perfect sync. To neighbors who would soon be jolted awake, nothing seemed unusual at first. The sky was still ink-dark, the streetlights flickered softly, and the only sound was the slow hum of cicadas. Then the stillness shattered. Dozens of agents in tactical gear surged forward, forming a disciplined line as they approached a modest single-story home. Their steps were fast but measured. This wasn't a routine police knock, nor one of those everyday warrants carried out by local deputies. This was federal. This was calculated. And according to investigators, this operation had roots stretching far beyond Louisiana, crossing oceans, borders, and battlefields. Inside that house, the FBI believed, was a man tied to one of the deadliest assaults of the 21st century, the quiet street that became a federal target. Minutes before 5:45 a.m., the lead agent motioned to breach. A neighbor later said she awoke to the sound of something like thunder, followed by frantic shouting. By the time she pulled her curtains aside, armed agents were already inside the home. It took seconds. Doors forced open, commands echoed through the hallway, and then silence. When the agents emerged, they had a single man in custody, Mahmoud Amin Yaqub al-Muhtadi, a 33-year-old Palestinian national who, as recently as the previous afternoon, had blended seamlessly into the fabric of southern Louisiana. To most who had encountered him, he was merely a quiet immigrant earning a living, working shifts at a modest restaurant and renting a small apartment where nothing ever seemed out of place. He kept his head down, he minded his business. And yet, the federal affidavit, sealed until the morning of the arrest, described a very different man, not a simple worker, but someone investigators linked to a Gaza-based paramilitary faction involved in the Hamas-led assault on Israel on October 7, 2023. The public would soon see headlines claiming an October 7th attacker found living in Louisiana. But the truth, as the FBI insisted, was more complicated and far more disturbing. Who was the man behind the Louisiana address? Federal records detailed a version of al-Muhtadi's life that seemed almost impossible to reconcile with his quiet routine in Lafayette. According to the investigators' timeline, he had allegedly participated in the incursion into southern Israel, crossing the border near one of the communities hit hardest that day. Court filings claimed that he gathered fellow fighters, armed himself, and communicated in real time as the events unfolded. Statements supported by intercepted calls and location data pulled from his mobile device. Several messages referenced chaos, war, and the belief that multiple regional factions would soon be drawn into a wider conflict. And yet, months after the attack, he managed to secure a U.S. visa. The embassy paperwork showed nothing unusual. No flagged history, no alerts, no criminal entries. By mid-2024, he stepped onto American soil with legal permanent residency, moving first to Oklahoma before settling in Louisiana. Investigators later noted that social media vetting had not been performed at the time of his visa approval, a lapse that Justice Department officials would come under scrutiny for. To locals in Lafayette, however, nothing about al-Muhtadi seemed extraordinary. He paid in cash, kept to himself, and worked long hours. It wasn't until a specialized federal task force began quietly watching him that the facade began to unravel. How the FBI found him. The trail didn't begin in Louisiana. It started with a cryptic data flag at the FBI's Counterterrorism Monitoring Center in Quantico. Analysts noticed activity from an encrypted account historically linked to Gaza. At first, it appeared to be residual signals, typical noise left behind from the conflict. But the more they examined the data, the more it pointed toward a very specific location in the American South. That location, Lafayette. Cross-referencing immigration logs, agents discovered a green card issued months earlier to a man whose personal details nearly matched those of an individual listed on an Israeli security database. This overlap triggered a deeper investigation. What followed wasn't cinematic surveillance, but methodical, weeks-long observation. His online habits, his messaging apps, where he shopped, where he prayed, which routes he drove to work. Agents reported finding a Gmail account tied to a Gaza-based domain. They tracked a small cryptocurrency wallet that made irregular transfers to a monitored exchange. They uncovered photographs from years earlier, showing him wearing fatigues and the red headband used by a paramilitary group operating in Gaza. But the most alarming detail came from an undercover interaction. According to the affidavit, al-Muhtadi dismissed federal warnings entirely, telling a confidential source that he could post photos of militant leaders openly, and nothing would happen to him. He seemed almost convinced of his own invisibility. That was the moment investigators decided they had enough. The search. What agents found inside. When federal teams finally entered his home, they expected propaganda materials, maybe outdated electronics. Instead, they discovered something far more serious. Sources familiar with the operation later revealed that the evidence included multiple encrypted storage devices, foreign currencies, notebooks containing both Arabic and English writing digital files referencing locations in the U.S., communication logs linked to overseas accounts. One evidence box carried a red classification marker, a sign that the materials were deemed too sensitive to disclose publicly. That single detail changed everything. Whatever the agents found forced them to shut down the scene, bring in a mobile forensic lab, and cover windows with reflective sheets to block visibility. Hours passed. Eventually, the boxes were transported to a secured facility, and the inventory list was sealed under a protective court order. What remained visible to the public were only the images: a small Louisiana home, federal agents coming and going, neighbors standing behind police tape, and the unsettling quiet that followed. The stillness after the raid felt heavier than the operation itself. As the sun climbed over the treetops and cast orange light across the neighborhood, curiosity began to ripple through the community. Residents stepped outside in slippers, clutching coffee mugs, whispering among themselves while trying to decipher what had unfolded just a few yards from their front lawns. Federal agents offered no answers. They packed equipment, marked off the house with fresh police tape, and spoke in low tones that made it clear the operation was not something they were willing or allowed to explain. Then, without warning, they were gone. The SUVs rolled away as quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind a single boarded door and a lingering question. What exactly had happened inside that house? Washington reacts with carefully crafted silence. News outlets pounced on the story within hours. The arrest of a suspected October 7th attacker on American soil was the kind of headline that ignited endless speculation. Reporters flooded the Louisiana Parish Courthouse, desperate for even a sentence from officials. But all they got was the same repeated phrase: ongoing national security investigation. In Washington, officials echoed it word for word. During a later briefing, the Attorney General stood alongside counterterrorism analysts and emphasized the United States' commitment to protecting Israel and preventing further violence. Yet when pressed about the evidence found in Lafayette, she sidestepped every question, offering broad assurances instead of specifics. Reporters noted the evasiveness immediately. Former federal officers called the silence strategic, designed to keep foreign groups uncertain about what the United States knew or didn't know. Commentators on cable networks speculated about infiltration networks. Some suggested sleeper cells. Others insisted it was merely a visa fraud case overhyped by national news. But to intelligence analysts familiar with these kinds of operations, the lack of details said something else entirely. If the evidence were minor, they explained, it would have been disclosed. If it were merely immigration paperwork, no classified annex would be necessary, and if the suspect posed no wider threat, the Justice Department wouldn't treat the case like an active counter-terror probe. The silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. What the classified annex may contain sources close to the investigative chain suggested that the sealed evidence likely involved three categories: digital communication logs linked to overseas operatives, encrypted files that required federal lab-level decryption, notes or materials referencing activity inside or related to the United States separately. None of these items automatically prove a national conspiracy. But together, they point to something that investigators could not ignore. A former intelligence analyst commented anonymously that whenever a red tag classified box appears in an arrest like this, it means someone found a thread, and they're tugging carefully to see what unravels. Another pointed out that if the seized hard drives contained communications from the miles following October 7th, the data might hold key information about escape routes, foreign facilitators, or channels used to move individuals between conflict zones and Western countries. That type of intelligence, if confirmed, would have immediate implications for counter-terror agencies across multiple nations. But all of this remains speculation. Outside the sealed courtroom and secured labs, nobody, not reporters, not neighbors, not even most government officials, knew what the FBI was really looking at. Life in Lafayette: confusion, fear, and disbelief. While the national conversation swirled, Lafayette itself grappled with disbelief. Interviews with locals painted a picture of a man who gave no obvious signs of extremist ties. A woman who worked with him at a restaurant described him as polite, quiet, always early for his shift. Another recalled that he insisted on paying rent in cash but never delayed a payment. The landlord, baffled, said the inside of the apartment was clean and sparse. No posters, no decorations, nothing unusual. And yet, in court documents, the federal narrative described him as someone with a paramilitary background, an individual who allegedly crossed into Israel during the October 7th assault and later managed to navigate international screening systems undetected. To some, the idea seemed impossible. How could someone involved in an overseas conflict slip undetected into rural Louisiana? How could someone allegedly connected to one of the deadliest modern attacks go unnoticed in plain sight? But intelligence experts were not surprised. They argued that major global conflicts often produce untracked migration, individuals who exploit gaps in verification, especially during chaotic periods when international databases are strained and overwhelmed. And for months, al-Muhtadi's quiet demeanor shielded him from suspicion, until the encrypted account he used years earlier unexpectedly became active again. The legal battle begins. Following the arrest, al-Muhtadi was transported under heavy guard to a regional detention center. His first court appearance was brief but notable. Surrounded by marshals, he declared his innocence repeatedly, insisting he had come to the United States only to live peacefully and work. His attorneys argued that the allegations lacked context. They claimed that the government had exaggerated the evidence, that location data from war zones was unreliable, and that photos showing him in fatigues were taken during a period in which many civilians wore similar clothing for protection. But federal prosecutors pressed forward and moved to classify the case as a special security proceeding, a rare designation typically reserved for terrorism, espionage, or cases involving classified intelligence sources. The judge approved the request. Immediately, restrictions tightened. Court filings were limited. Sensitive documents were sealed. The government continuously referred to a still undisclosed classified annex that, according to them, justified the extraordinary measures. Still, no specific terrorism charges had yet been filed, only immigration-related offenses. This raised a troubling question. If the evidence was powerful enough to classify the case as a security threat, why weren't formal terrorism charges included? Legal analysts theorized two possibilities. Federal investigators were still decrypting evidence and did not want to reveal premature accusations. The government had intelligence that could not be introduced in open court without compromising international sources. In short, they might have more, but could not legally show it. Behind the scenes, the hard drives, and what they might reveal. Perhaps the most mysterious part of the case lay not in the man himself, but in the materials seized from his home. According to those familiar with federal procedures, the mobile forensic lab deployed during the raid was not standard. It was used when investigators believed time-sensitive digital evidence needed immediate on-site triage. This suggested that the agents were not merely collecting devices. They needed to know right away what was on them. Encrypted drives can take months, sometimes years, to break open. But even preliminary indicators, metadata, file structures, traces of deleted logs can be seen quickly with specialized tools. And if those indicators connected the drives to foreign communication hubs or conflict-related channels, it would explain why the FBI escalated the case instantly. What the agents found remains locked behind federal silence, but what they reacted to was unmistakably serious. A case that America still doesn't understand. In the days that followed, the arrest faded from national headlines. But inside federal offices, analysts continued to sift through the materials. Diplomatic channels quietly exchanged information with foreign intelligence services. And in a detention center in Louisiana, Mahmoud al-Muhtadi waited, insisting he was being mistaken for someone else. Maybe he was. Or maybe the man who walked quietly among Louisiana residents carried with him a far darker past. One thing was certain. The public had been shown only the surface. The truth, whatever it was, remained sealed inside evidence boxes, encrypted drives, and classified documents that no civilian would see for years, if ever. As federal prosecutors prepared their next moves, a second layer of the story began to unfold, one the public couldn't see but insiders recognized immediately. When a case is designated as a special security proceeding, the courtroom transforms. There are closed-door sessions, evidence summaries instead of full displays, and government attorneys who speak in careful, measured tones because even a single misplaced detail can compromise foreign intelligence assets abroad. This was not a typical immigration or fraud case. It operated in the legal shadows reserved for threats the government believes may be connected to overseas networks. Inside the federal playbook, the Justice Department had reasons for proceeding cautiously. Terrorism-related charges require airtight evidence that can withstand public scrutiny. Yet intelligence gathered from foreign battlefields, especially those involving non-state actors, often comes from classified sources, intercepted communications, or informants whose identities must remain protected. Revealing such sources could jeopardize ongoing operations or expose individuals working covertly inside hostile regions. So prosecutors took a different route. Charge al-Muhtadi with the crimes they could prove immediately: visa fraud and falsifying documents, while holding back the deeper allegations until after the encrypted materials were analyzed. This strategy wasn't new. It mirrored past cases where suspects connected to foreign conflicts were first held on minor charges, while investigators worked behind the scenes to build broader cases. The approach allowed federal authorities to keep the suspect detained legally, while preventing premature disclosure of classified evidence. Still, critics accused the government of withholding too much. Civil liberties groups argued that the secrecy surrounding the raid left room for political manipulation, pointing out that high-profile arrests can be used to influence public sentiment during periods of global instability. But those arguments faded quickly as more details, however limited, leaked from within intelligence circles. The encrypted communications. An official speaking anonymously revealed that investigators had discovered communication logs believed to originate from an account used by militants during the October 7th attacks. These logs, according to the source, were routed through multiple encrypted platforms and surfaced again months later from an IP address traced to Louisiana. If true, this alone would explain the urgency behind the raid. Another detail emerged. Several of the drives seized from al-Muhtadi's residence contained layers of encryption not typically used by civilians. Analysts reportedly detected islands of hidden data, suggesting the presence of files intentionally concealed beneath decoy partitions. The implication was clear. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide the contents, yet until the drives were fully cracked, if they ever could be, the investigators remained tight-lipped. Questions that no one could answer publicly. The core mystery persisted. Was al-Muhtadi truly involved in the October 7th attack, or was he a peripheral figure whose online connections drew the attention of federal agencies? His defense team maintained he had never participated in violence, arguing that the government had misinterpreted encrypted chatter and mistaken him for someone with a similar name. They highlighted the lack of direct photographs placing him at the scene. They insisted he was fleeing instability, not part of it. But prosecutors countered with location data. Phone records allegedly traced his device crossing into Israel during the attack. Officials stated that messages he received that morning referenced chaos, opened gates, and this time there will be no end. Though none of this had yet been presented fully in court, it fueled the government's insistence that al-Muhtadi was not just a bystander. Why Louisiana? One of the most unsettling questions lingered beneath the headlines. Why would a man allegedly linked to a major foreign attack choose a quiet American parish as his residence? Intelligence experts proposed several explanations. Low-profile regions offer anonymity. People blend in easily in quiet suburban environments. Employment opportunities exist without extensive background checks. Restaurants, small retailers, and ride-hailing platforms often rely on simple ID verification. Louisiana is near major transport routes. Interstates, shipping corridors, and regional hubs make travel discreet. Community networks offer support. Even small immigrant communities can provide work leads, housing tips, and assistance navigating new environments. Still, the idea that someone with alleged ties to a violent assault could hide so effectively in plain view unsettled both local residents and national policymakers. Behind closed doors, federal strategy sessions. As weeks passed, the case transitioned from public news to internal governmental focus. In Washington, interagency meetings were convened involving the Justice Department, DHS, the National Counterterrorism Center, and military intelligence liaisons. The agenda reportedly included whether al-Muhtadi acted alone or had contacts inside the U.S., what the encrypted drives contained, whether visa screening procedures needed urgent revision, Whether related accounts overseas had shown similar activity, and what diplomatic fallout the case might trigger in the Middle East. One official noted that arrests like this carry geopolitical weight. If the FBI found communications tying a paramilitary operator to U.S.-based activity, foreign governments would demand answers. And if the evidence pointed toward a network rather than an individual, the stakes would rise exponentially. The neighbor who saw too much during the second week after the arrest, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down, gave an interview to a local news station. She described the moment the agents breached the home. "They moved like they knew exactly where everything was," she said. "It wasn't random. It was practiced." Indeed, the FBI rarely executes a raid unless they have a highly detailed understanding of the inside of a property. Floor plans, entry points, expected hazards. This meant surveillance had been extensive, long before the public noticed anything. She also mentioned seeing agents carry out small but heavy boxes and a large thermal inspection device used to identify hidden compartments. Her statement suggested the search had been far more thorough than the public realized. Inside the detention center, meanwhile, al-Muhtadi's time in custody grew increasingly tense. According to attorneys, he had requested relocation within the facility due to safety concerns, though officials declined to elaborate. Terrorism-adjacent suspects often face hostility from other inmates, and federal holding centers typically attempt to segregate such individuals when possible. He reportedly spent most of his time in a small cell, reading, writing letters, and speaking little to anyone but his legal counsel. His demeanor appeared calm, almost resigned, which perplexed some guards. Whether this was composure, defiance, or simply cultural stoicism was impossible to know. The case that unsettled the intelligence community. Privately, intelligence officials admitted that the arrest in Louisiana had forced them to confront uncomfortable realities. If al-Muhtadi truly entered the United States legally after participating in a major international attack, it suggested weaknesses in current screening systems, gaps foreign actors might exploit again. It also raised another chilling possibility. Was he the only one? Federal agencies began quietly reviewing visa approvals, looking for similar patterns, matching names, overlapping travel histories, signals from encrypted accounts, sudden disappearances after conflict events. Most of these checks never became public, but insiders indicated that the process was extensive. Whether anything else surfaced is unknown. A story without an ending. Yet as the weeks turned into months, al-Muhtadi's encrypted drives remained under federal examination. The evidence list stayed sealed, and the public narrative remained suspended somewhere between fear, speculation, and silence. Some believed he was a dangerous operative caught just in time. Others believed he was a victim of mistaken identity during a period of global tension. And some feared that the truth might be far more complex than either story allowed. One thing was undeniable. The Lafayette raid had pierced the illusion that global conflicts stay continents away. Sometimes, their echoes reach far beyond the battlefield, into quiet neighborhoods, small-town restaurants, and the most unassuming homes. And sometimes the people living inside those homes aren't who they appear to be. The federal case soon entered a strange limbo, a space where the public knew enough to be uneasy, yet nowhere near enough to understand what truly lay beneath the surface. In news cycles, the story drifted behind politics, overseas conflicts, and domestic issues. But inside government offices, the investigation continued with relentless precision, the intelligence that never reaches the public. In situations involving foreign paramilitary groups, intelligence often comes in fragments, intercepted calls, half-translated messages, images scraped from social media, or location data recorded in unstable network conditions. None of these pieces alone prove guilt, but together they create patterns, And in al-Muhtadi's case, the patterns kept aligning. Teams working out of Quantico reportedly spent months reconstructing digital timelines from multiple devices. Analysts attempted to validate geolocation logs from Gaza during the October 7th attack, cross-referencing satellite data, telecommunications drifts, and timestamps from nearby cell towers that had survived the initial assault. Even if the results remained inconclusive, they still contributed to a broader mosaic, one that painted al-Muhtadi as someone present in the region during the events prosecutors believed he participated in. But the deeper investigators went, the more careful they became. Some evidence, if introduced in court, could compromise foreign partners who risk their lives to acquire intelligence in hostile areas. Some digital findings came from surveillance tools not meant for public acknowledgement. Revealing them could not only jeopardize ongoing investigations, but undermine national capabilities. Thus, the case continued in a quiet storm of secrecy. The international dimension. While the American public saw only glimpses of the evolving situation, foreign governments were paying full attention. Diplomatic channels between Washington, Cairo, Tel Aviv, and other regional capitals buzzed with activity. One Middle Eastern intelligence partner reportedly provided additional historical information on al-Muhtadi, details about individuals he had associated with years earlier, rumors of training sessions conducted in rural Gaza, and photographs showing groups of young men in paramilitary drills. Whether these records were definitive or not, they added weight to the Justice Department's suspicions. For Israel, the case served as a chilling reminder that individuals involved in the October 7th assault may have dispersed far beyond the Middle East. For Egypt, it raised uncomfortable questions about visa screening at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. For the United States, it signaled that global conflicts had developed a new dimension, one that could reach American neighborhoods in ways previously considered unlikely. Inside the classified annex. Although sealed from the public, the classified annex accompanying al-Muhtadi's case reportedly contained communication fragments referencing Brothers Abroad, maps downloaded from public U.S. infrastructure websites, encrypted channels linked to Gaza, area networks, financial transfers via cryptocurrency wallets monitored for irregular activity, notes written in both Arabic and English describing movements and tasks. None of these pieces, in isolation, established an operational threat, but the combination was troubling enough for federal authorities to keep the annex hidden from open court. A federal judge reviewing it privately described the contents only as sensitive, complex, and directly tied to matters of national security. The judge provided no further elaboration. Public opinion deepens the divide. As more fragments appeared in the news, opinions split sharply. Some Americans believed al-Muhtadi was a dangerous actor who had slipped through a flawed immigration system and needed to be detained indefinitely until the full truth emerged. To them, the Louisiana raid was proof that hostile militants could attempt to build shadows inside the United States. Others argued that the government was weaponizing uncertainty, using secrecy to imply guilt without presenting actual evidence. They warned that cases built on classified intelligence risk misidentifying individuals, especially those fleeing conflict zones with incomplete records. Social media echoed this divide. Comment threads were filled with arguments, speculation, accusations, and political interpretations. In the haze of online reaction, the human reality of the case, one man sitting alone in a Louisiana detention center, became obscured. Al-Muhtadi's perspective. If the accused man felt fear, he didn't show it publicly. In interviews with his legal team, he repeated the same claims. He had no involvement in the October 7th attack. He had never coordinated fighters or crossed into Israeli territory. The photographs showing him with paramilitary headbands were taken during a community event, not combat. The encrypted accounts allegedly tied to him were mistaken identity or manipulated data. He insisted he came to America simply to start over. He claimed the intelligence against him had been twisted or misinterpreted due to political pressure. But his denials, though steady, could not erase the mountain of unanswered questions surrounding him, the turning point no one saw coming. In early winter, the FBI's digital forensics team made a breakthrough. One of the encrypted drives, previously believed to be secured with layers of obfuscation, revealed a hidden partition when analyzed under a newer generation decryption suite. Inside, investigators reportedly found several deleted image caches, a communication log referencing the period surrounding the October 7th conflict, transcripts of voice notes exchanged over encrypted messaging platforms. Most of these files were heavily corrupted or partially overwritten. But even fragments were enough to deepen the government's concerns. The discovery did not immediately lead to new charges. Prosecutors remained cautious, aware that introducing partial or context-free digital fragments into court could raise more questions than answers. But internally, the breakthrough validated months of investigative pressure. Meanwhile, analysts continued working through terabytes of data. The case was no longer simply about a man living quietly in Louisiana. It touched broader questions about infiltration routes, post-conflict migration patterns, and the evolving nature of global extremism. The possible futures of the case. By mid-year, officials believed the case could branch into several possible outcomes. Additional charges filed. If more concrete evidence emerges connecting al-Muqtadi directly to the October 7th attack, federal terrorism charges may follow. The case remains sealed indefinitely. If sensitive intelligence cannot be presented openly, the court may restrict access permanently, leaving the public with incomplete storylines. The case ends with immigration-related penalties. If the national security elements remain unprovable in court, prosecutors may rely solely on visa fraud charges. The case triggers broader reform. Visa screening, social media vetting, and encrypted communication monitoring may face new scrutiny. Every path has consequences: political, legal, and diplomatic. What the case means for America. What happened in Lafayette wasn't just a story about a man and an arrest. It exposed a larger truth. Global instability doesn't stay at a distance. It travels, it migrates, it hides, and sometimes it walks the grocery aisles and quiet neighborhoods of places like Louisiana without anyone realizing. Whether al-Muqtadi turns out to be a mastermind, a minor participant, or an innocent man caught in the machinery of suspicion remains unresolved. But the raid illuminated a stark reality. The line between international conflict and American life is thinner than it once was. The ending, for now. As of today, the drives remain under analysis at a secure facility, possibly Quantico, possibly Langley. The classified annex sits behind locked doors. Federal agents continue reviewing encrypted fragments. And in a Louisiana detention center, a man accused of crossing one border in war and another border in search of refuge waits in legal limbo. The truth, whatever it may be, lies somewhere inside those sealed evidence boxes, encrypted logs, and unanswered questions. Until the government declassifies more information, the real story of the Lafayette raid remains suspended between shadow and fact.